Welcome to the J3U University Podcast. I'm your host, John Jewett.
And I'm your co-host, Luke Miller.
Our mission is to elevate the physique coaching standard
and to bring the highest level of competitor to the stage.
Let's jump into today's episode. You didn't need a refeed, you needed a Deoutput. Question mark, what is a Deoutput? And if you've been tuned in to listen to Luke and I for a bit, you might already know, but there's a lot of times within fat loss phases, or more so we're talking about a contest prep here, where you have to make the call of, where should I go about implementing refeeds and also managing fatigue? And I think refeeds can get used at incorrect times. And so that's what we want to really talk about today and help give you some tools to assess when you should be utilizing refeeds and then when might you be utilizing a Deoutput and what that actually looks like for you.
Yeah, I love this conversation, John. I would bet the house almost on the amount of times that I've fixed people's prep processes simply from like removing high days or removing a repeating refeed or whatever this might be. Just people needing more time in a deficit for a longer stint. And I think a lot of this comes with not fully understanding how to identify the problems we're actually solving for. Because what is the goal when people are plugging in refeed? And that's the question I think we need to answer today. And does that differentiate from the goal of dropping fatigue and allowing someone to continue with fat loss? And is there a cosmetic visual change that we're chasing with food rather than simply just fatigue drop? And is there more efficient ways to keep someone in a deficit and drop fatigue? And answer that question. And that kind of starts to me, and correct me if you think differently, but identification of the problems that crop up when you're starting to see this potentially come up as a need.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great start point of assessing, well, you need to know why you are doing these things to begin with. And if you know why you're doing them, it might give you a better rationale into assessing those areas and knowing when to deploy that tool. And I think that's where we make a lot of the mistakes is maybe not looking too far into why you are using them to begin with. Let me tell you a story here about my my first prep, the Lackland Classic here in San Antonio. This was a time when refeeds or cheat meals, it was still thought of, this is circa 2011, 12, when these things were still thought to be like this metabolic booster. So you'd like be dieting hard during the week, you throw in your refeed, and this is just supposed to keep you chugging along, dieting, keep the metabolic furnace stoked, and keep you moving. And so what I was doing, and every Friday night I was going to Whataburger, which that is like the Texas fast food burger place that is number one in Texas, period. And then I would go to Orange Leaf, which is a yogurt place. You can just like weigh out yogurt by the pound or by the ounce, but I'm weighing it by the pound.
I don't think it's meant to be by the pound, John.
Yeah. How many ounces, sir? No. I'll take pounds. So anyway, that was my like Friday night normal thing. And of course, afterwards I'd go home and pose and be like, man, veins are popping out. Like this is all going in a good direction. But then the next week, what was it, right? Oh man, that food was so good. I can't wait to have that again. Thought about it the whole week. And also by that Wednesday, Thursday, I was just drilling myself and felt like walking through mud trying to get to school that day because fatigue was so high. And then just repeat, rinse and repeat. And so what we come now to know is that there's not really a metabolic stoking that does happen with refeeds. That's not the why to deploying them to begin with. And what I was just doing is digging a hole to fill it back in on the weekend and ended up just kind of lowering my caloric level into closer to maintenance. So I had to just diet really, really hard during the week to like earn this meal. And where we should really see the purpose of refeeds is to bring back training to a level that can sustain muscle retention. And that's not really occurring till we're getting to a spot of getting pretty flat and depleted to where your fuel is then becoming a limitation. And so knowing that, and where we've seen like current scientific literature of asking these whys in science of how do refeeds work, knowing it's not metabolic benefit, showing that just slows down your fat loss dieting period, but really it probably aids more around just fueling training. And potentially there's some psychological benefits and maybe improved sleep that in turn helps with continued fatigue management across prep. But that's only for certain people, right? We could talk about this as well. But knowing that, that's probably the later part of the dieting process where refeeds would be really beneficial when you're actually depleted and you're getting to a lean state. But what do you do in the early part of the dieting process? And I think this is when we can talk about Deoutputs, but here's the client situation of where it happens is like I've just had a client recently, we were prepping along and you start seeing like scale weight rise up. Subjectively, like legs are getting heavy and they're not fully depleted. You know, they have enough fuel there. It's training is the issue driving a lot of the fatigue. And if you let that keep going on prep and keep raising up, that's when everything starts slowing down with fat loss for when they start retaining more water, but also everything becomes more inefficient. Like training becomes more challenging, so they're not driving as much stimulus to retain tissue. Cardio becomes more challenging, so they start finding ways to make it easier, just inadvertently. They start lowering their non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and so they just inadvertently make up for the deficit. And also could definitely become losing muscle along the way in that process. So what do? How do you address when fatigue from output is the main issue? Is you address output. So with this client situation, we have 1 day a week where we just pull back on all sides of the equation on output. And guess what? Sometimes I add 2 days back to back of that. And that Monday, weight drops, scale weight drops, look harder than ever, and at a new low body weight. And so this is where I'll throw back to you, Luke, is maybe differentiating between, low glycogen versus allostatic fatigue level, and then maybe breaking down what we're talking about here about these Deoutput days.
Yeah, I don't think we can solely look at performance. I think there's a component of how much fat is there left to lose in this equation. I think there's this component of where in the prep someone is and understanding that someone's body fat percentage can contribute to their fuel available to support training. And I think that this can be something to consider with kind of what lever we're pulling and leaning into deloads/deoutputs more, especially kind of in that middle portion of prep where we're probably taking a large percentage of that progress. That's challenging, right? Because the progress on the forefront is pretty easy. Like you just change a few habits, you drop a little bit of fluid weight, you're kind of moving at a quick pace because you can support that rate of loss pretty easily with food still being high relative to a contest prep. Compounds are starting to come in usually, so you're supporting training performance pretty easily. And so the metrics that I use from a subjective perspective, I don't always solely look at performance. I'm going to be looking at how are they filling their check-in tracker out? Is it as full as they usually do it or not? Is there signs of demotivation showing up in the verbiage that they're showing? I ask my clients a question, and for any clients watching, you're going to chuckle at this, is like, do your legs feel 10 feet behind you? It's like that trudging through mud feeling, right? So I'll ask pointing questions kind of around this, because that is something that the more focused individual will just keep trucking along with. And this is kind of where I start to differentiate between, is this a recovery issue or is this a fuel issue? Because sometimes like you'll pull this Deoutput and you see training performance bounce right back to where it needs to be. And so it's not a food situation. And a lot of times it's because they have enough body fat percentage on them that it'd be crazy to think that with where the food is and the body fat percentage, they need to pull food back up to accommodate this. It's going to be one of either duration of time since the last time they deloaded and or a need to pull back on the output side of the equation to recover and then be able to go back into it. A lot of times the first or second time I'm doing this, I'm coinciding this with volume drops in the training sessions as well. And so this is where the Deoutput day fits extremely well, because what it does is it limits the time that's wasted within the prep process. Full deloads in the off season for some people will be 5, 6, 7 days. And so with a Deoutput, we're able to get in and out. John said he even does 1 day one sometimes. I tend to do 2 days, maybe 3, most of the time 2 day Deoutputs, and keep them at a food level that's constant, allow them to recover, see an accurate weight trend, which I think this is the biggest portion of this process, is when you're seeing that weight spike happen and it continues to spike or it continues to hold high, you get a more accurate assessment of where the client's actually at, both visually and body weight wise. And then we can get back into the deficit and continue moving forward. And this is where I kind of lean into that a little bit more, where on the back end of prep, where body fat percentage is low, maybe I'm even using these high days to assess changes in the cosmetic visuals as well. I'll potentially use a combination of Deoutput with high food or just a little bit of high food in order to kind of assess that client's response into what will eventually support my peak week decisions.
You had briefly said something interesting that maybe some people's ears perked up. Or like, what do you mean? Was that the body fat levels there to support training, which some people might say, Luke, we're not fueling training with body fat, right? But I think it's another way to look at this is also energy availability across a contest prep, because there's kind of 3 prongs here with as you get to a state with low energy availability is when you see more of these chronic diet adaptations occurring, higher amounts of fatigue, which the 3 prongs here are your body fat level, your output, and your input. So if you have like high body fat, you have still a reasonable amount of food, but a lot of times you're absolutely starting prep with the same amount of training in the off season relatively. And then usually steps are high and cardio is coming in. So that output side of the question is probably your biggest lever that's been pushed. And not there yet to where the other variables like low body fat and low food availability are the main drivers to when those are, you're not going to add body fat back on, but you obviously have the input lever to push once that one is now becoming the bigger driver in the issue. Once you're kind of or at least at a steady state of like cardio and step count and training is what it is. So by that, what Luke is speaking to here is, body fat's high enough to where it's not the big contributor for the detriment in energy availability. But to another thing that you brought up too, Luke, was programming this in. And I think I would like to hear how you go about this with someone starting prep, because it sounds like if you run the same caloric deficit every single day, or are you having a planned day that where, hey, we're starting the Deoutput day somewhat like with just cardio and without that day and no posing, or do those still just reactively get put in? And on the front end of your prep, are you still running like just the same deficit daily?
Yeah, I love this question. So there's some the answer is both. There's some front end planning and then there's some reactive planning, and we're going to go through each one. So the front end planning is, and I think this is what separates and differentiates how well we get ahead on contest preps. Like you can look at someone like Emily King, and she is 3 weeks out and ready, and she's 2 kilograms below where she'll go on stage. And so like we're just in this peak week process testing, but something that happened on this preemptive planning for this contest prep is I do a pretty extensive full deload right before the prep starts. So this would be both training and cardiovascular activity pre-prep to move someone into a contest prep in a fresh slate. This allows me to not have, based on the rate of loss that I've built for that person's contest prep, as many interruptions in the prep that pull me away from pushing someone down that rate of loss as potentially I could have if I wouldn't have pulled that deload. So that's a preemptive planning that I do. A secondary preemptive planning that I do is the amount of cardiovascular activity someone does is relative to the amount of days that they've been doing in the off season to maintain body composition. at minimum, I'm always going to be having one day where there's not cardiovascular activity and there's not posing that would allow for this person to have a break from output during the week. So max preps are going to be starting at 6 days per week. The one caveat I will allow someone to have is if it's part of their daily routine to the point that it helps them like maintain their schedule. But usually I try to encourage them that 7th day is just a steps session rather than an actual output day. And most of the time preps are starting with mostly steps anyways. So these are some 2 preemptive plannings. The reactive planning that comes into play is when I'm starting to see those subjective metrics come in, and I'm pulling those in an off-the-cuff manner based on how I'm seeing this rate of loss move and or fatigue build up on the back end relative to how it's affecting their ability to execute. And so I say the reference to the rate of loss because I love doing this with clients that are ahead as well. And John, I know you've done this before too. You have the client that rips it off on the front end. They rip it off on the front end. They maintain a rate of loss that's pretty significant throughout kind of the early middle portions of prep. And they're so far ahead on their contest prep that there is potential to maintain training performance easier without having to dip into deloads or anything that would be required to push back into retain training performance. That I'll slow that rate of loss down because we're actually ahead. And I'll use Deoutput days in those situations as well. But some preemptive, some reactive. I will say mostly probably reactive because the preemptive have already been planned into the plans themselves.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to today's podcast. Are you struggling to hit your peak on show day? Feeling lost in the off season? Upgrade your coaching game with J3U University. Our program covers everything from off season to contest prep to peak week, all based from real client results. Along with our comprehensive physique curriculum, you'll also get access to our 4 rooms with our J3U team to answer any questions you have and live Q&A sessions to further your coaching and athlete experience. We are the source of education for top IFBB pros and coaches. Join us to elevate the coaching standard at J3U University. Let's get back to today's podcast. Yeah, I'm glad I wanted to pull that from you because I was wondering how you planned it out. Because I planned it out that way too. And I think as I've coached longer and longer, obviously I've moved away from my weekly Whataburger, but even to the extent of I don't refeed people very often. So if you're coming like, I want John to coach me, like you probably won't get a lot of refeeds from me at least, relatively so. I think this is just a strategy that keeps fat loss really productive and you don't lose days because, case in point here, I had a prep of a little while back that I thought it was time to hit the refeed, and based on someone's off season and what they were dieting on, I'm like, okay, 150 grams of carbs, like this is going to work. Like this is a good start point. And they come up like 5 pounds. And I'm like, oh no. And then I'm like, they maybe had more than 150 grams of carbs. And so for one, there's that, the psychological thing of putting in more food. And if someone can't manage that, but then also you like load them full of glycogen and maybe someone overshoots. And then it takes like a week to get them back down just to that baseline from there. And you pretty much do lose a week. And so when you mapped out a timeline where maybe you have a buffer week in there, maybe you just lost that. So, to get back to the glycogen depleted state is when fat loss gets really productive. You need that to happen. So with the Deoutput day, there's just an avoidance of that can occur, especially like this as we get closer to peak week for weight class based divisions, when you're really having to manage fatigue, but you can't let body weight go up either. That's a huge strategy to just utilize, is start to pull way back on the output side of the equation and just maintain food. It's the same idea of what we're trying to accomplish, of just getting someone close to maintenance, but you're not doing it by means of food. But anyway, that's a mistake that can easily be made, is hitting the refeed and just losing time on prep. And I've made those mistakes. So a lot of times along the way. And what I mentioned earlier, Luke, is like 24 hours for like a Deoutput. That's kind of like what's pre-built in at the start of prep. And you're right, at the start of prep, it's easy, like 10,000 steps a day. That's just normal activity. Like it's just not very fatiguing at all. So to like actually have something reactive that goes in, yeah, that's what we're talking about. Hey, no training, actually lower the steps, like intentionally get them off their feet, relaxing, and probably having to do that usually 2 days in a row is when it finally sees it makes a big impact. But I think shifting for de-outputs and then eventually getting back into utilizing refeeds is a nice strategy to utilize to like get fat loss off, not lose time on prep. And then by the end of prep, when you're lean and you're bringing food back on, you can feel really good going into your show.
I think it does something else too that I want to comment on. Like your ability to maintain training performance to me is higher if we're running a bit of a steadier deficit because we're not getting these zigzag days.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it leads to you're not having these days as often where you're just like, you're hitting the F this red button of like, this session's going to be a wash because my food is so low because, you know, I have a high day in 3 days and you're having to account for that high day and the total deficit for the week. And so this is kind of where that consistent deficit, I think, makes the most sense. But I think to your point on the back end of prep, man, your ability to get ahead, stay ahead, not let refeeds put you behind, and then pull food back in and drop activity once the dieting's done. Man, the best physiques come on stage when that happens. It is hard to explain without showing it. Like it is unreal, the difference.
Yeah, I think with the refeed is like what I see is usually where someone's quickly running into bodyweight lows and then seeing the visuals, they do look flat. And then what I'll notice with training performance feedback is that usually stamina drops off pretty quick.
Yep.
So they might be losing some reps on the last few sets or towards the end of the session. There's a pretty big drop off. And if fat loss is on track, that's what would spur on the refeed. And what you would not be noticing, and sometimes it is like, it does happen at the same time, are those signs of also being more of the output issue of systemic fatigue, where usually at this point, it's not that they feel so completely buried, you know, and legs super heavy, exhausted, 10 feet behind them, like you said. You could try to separate those out, but they very well could be together. And then a refeed does address some level of fatigue, but I usually would lean to a de-output if I'm seeing all those signs and there's the, you know, legs are really heavy. Systemically, they feel just completely gassed. That might be more the de-output with some food, maybe even being raised too. I've done a little bit of both at the same time. But again, that kind of comes towards like the later phases of prep when that's occurring.
Yeah, 100%.
To your point you brought up, I think it's good to bring up the psychological piece of dieting.
Yeah.
Because I've done some carb cycling approaches or caloric rotations. I've done all kinds of things dieting, cyclic ketogenic diets, dieting, and you get those days where you're like, man, to go to your low day, it's very mentally taxing. And then you go back to a high day and the food's way higher and it is usually more palatable with more carbohydrate in, which gets you a little bit more of the dopamine hit, but then you get dropped back down on your low days. And it can make for some people the dieting process feel more burdensome versus having a little bit more food on all days and just a consistent approach and a little bit less rotation and more palatable like carbs basically coming in. That can be a way to lessen the burden of dieting over doing the rotation. I get the rotation trying to add more fuel onto and around training. I think that might just get a little overstated of how much fuel you actually need from training. And I would also question the training approach in that. So are you managing volume within your dieting phase and also just doing straight sets and long enough rest periods to really uphold training? Because like my training and people I program, like we can go pretty low volume to where there's not a large energy requirement for your training and maintain tissue very well. I think where I see the problem is when people are still running very high volume approaches or still doing like drop sets or supersets and things that just aren't as productive for stimulus, but create a lot of fatigue and also require a lot of fueling. And you kind of burn out quicker than what you would if you're running a low volume approach that is making the most out of every set. So that's what things that I would start pulling apart if you're running into those issues, and you have the idea that maybe a cyclic approach might be better. Just try to really assess and analyze all the components of maybe just being a more static deficit, having more fuel in every day, and making sure you're managing your training volume would be more applicable in those situations.
I 100% agree. I think the longer I coach, the smaller the gaps between training and rest day becomes nutritionally. And I even have a lot of people just doing a single day plan, like just rolling with that consistent deficit.
It becomes less exciting. Like I wish there was a selling approach of we do carb backloading and ramp set training. I don't know what that is. It sounds really cool though, right? Like I want to do that. It's like, right, I know it's a secret. And it's like, no, we're just selling like the basics, but we're really good at the basics. And so that's what we want to get you, is really good at the basics. Yeah. And that's how you get to that elite level. But it's not as sexy, but usually doing the things the right and consistent way, sometimes they're not as sexy. So anything else you'd add around that, Luke? Do you think we've adequately covered on a Deoutput, or have you anything comes to mind on like Deoutput days that have gone wrong, or things to look out for?
The one thing I would look out for is the preps that get pretty harsh, because the Deoutput on the back end of the peak can be a large shift, and it's easy to want to pull the refeed button when that happens, and it doesn't improve the visuals most of the time, because if you're pushing someone that hard to get all the way there, they're either barely making it or still not quite there in the first place. And just filling them back up all the way to blasting full is only going to make those visuals look a little bit more watery. I leave heavily on it during that time frame, where my peak week will even change training wise. Like if you're running you pick up a prep and it's just a little bit behind, and so you're kind of running the gauntlet of making sure they get there. Like it even changes to where maybe Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of peak week is no training, no cardio, half steps. I've seen people shift off 7-8 pounds before. And as a coach, it's like, oh shoot, do I hit the refeed button here? Like, what do I do? Like, oh crap. And you're like watching them, and it's just like consistent drops every day. But it's like, if you're just patient and let it happen, like the visuals are always going to turn out better.
Yeah. If you're looking harder and improved every day, then you let that keep going.
Yeah.
It's like, why fix what's looking better is the thing.
Yeah. It's like,
right?
It can panic some people though. I know, like just with the coaches I mentor, I've had a couple that they've been like panicking seeing this dropping. I'm like, just let it happen. Like you can always put food in and slowly titrate it up.
You know, like, are you losing 5 pounds of muscle the last few days of peak week? Like, no. So what do you think's happening? It's like, what you change, and why would that cause weight drop to happen, right? So it's stepping back, remove emotion, think logically. It's like, okay, if we're removing cardio, we're doing less steps, why would weight drop from that? It's like, yeah, fatigue. That makes sense. Do we want fatigue to look like we're muscles full? Like, no, it just makes you look soft. Yeah. So that's absolutely like first strategy approach is like getting someone to a maintenance calorie level by means of reducing output first. Could be a big player. One thing I just did with like our coach Colton, he's in a good body fat position. We had him down to like 189, and that we had a couple more pounds to come off, and he got there, and his fatigue actually got hit pretty hard. Training got hit pretty hard. And I'm like, all right, output's already been scaled back. Like I want to take a big whack at bringing him back, restoring him. And I hit him with like 2 refeed days back to back, which he doesn't like getting more food because he's like, yeah, let's go. Let's just grind. And brought his weight up like 4 pounds, which he's like, yeah, it's like, I look softer. It's like, I know you spilt a little bit, and that's okay because we have like 3 weeks. But he's like, I had the best 2 nights of sleep I've had all prep, and like that will sustain training as well. And then now I have some data to look at too off of like what the refeed did. However, it's going to take him a few days to get back down to like a nice weight that I want to maintain him at. So this is the thing that Luke's bringing up. If I did that and I was 7 days out from a show and I brought Colton up to like 193, 194, I might just be landing right before the show to get him back to like a good weight that I'd want him at. And that doesn't leave a lot of coaching time to try to make adjustments. So not best practice for hitting front loads on clients when you don't have like data to go with. So, but anyway, yeah, no, I think that covers it all. Just keep in mind your Deoutput days, and these should be taking the place a lot of times for your refeeds. And I think you'll find you'll get much more out of your preps with managing fatigue, and in turn being able to sustain deficits for longer periods of time and getting people to show ready ahead and not losing those weeks. So tune in next week and we will cover sometimes the right move is doing nothing, which if you to take some hints of things that we are doing today when you might not want to be doing those things. And that's what we'll talk about next week. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you then.